Hello, welcome to my Wartales start of the game guide. I'm a host, Methfu. So, as many of you know, I've been doing class guides for all the Wartales classes, and in the comment sections of those class guides, I've been getting loads of questions about how to start the game. So, due to high demand, I've actually made a guide on how to start the game and what the best options are. Okay, so we are going to go through all the options and have a look through, give the pros and cons, and I'll say which ones are the best to pick at the start of the game. So, apprentice friends looking for an adventure starts with influence plus 30, raw materials minus 5. Starting companions, swordsman, archer, ranger, brute. So swordsman and brute are both tanks. Tanks are very good in the early game. Archer is very weak at the early game, but gets strong around mid to late game. Ranger, kind of the same as archer, but slightly better than archer. Ranger will pick up around the mid game. So this is actually quite a strong starting point. They've got men escorting merchants who lost their employer. Starts with crowns at 150 plus. Then we've got medicine minus 2. Medicine minus 2 is kind of a bit crap, but you got the crowns to kind of negate it. So you got enough crowns to be able to buy 2 medicines, or just about buy 2. Then you got starting companions, swordsman, warrior, spearman, brute. So once again, swordsman, warrior, and brute are pretty much all tanks. Swordsman and brute, especially tanks. Warrior does a lot of damage at the start. Again, as I said before, just a second ago, that at the start of the game, having tankier people means you're making less mistakes, because if you get accidentally hit by accident, or someone comes along and smacks you really hard, you won't feel the negative effects so much because you have a tanky character to take the blow. Spearmen are very, very good at the start of the game as well, because they have an ability that actually negates or shuts down a whole attack for the enemy. And at the start of the game, that can actually mean life or death. They've got deserters, fleeing, and abusive captain. Starts with raw materials plus 10, suspicion plus 50, starting companions, swordsman, warrior, archer, ranger. So this is fairly balanced setup again. So swordsman's pretty much your tank, warrior will be doing most of the damage, archer once again is very weak in the early game, picks up mid late, ranger picks up in the mid game pretty much, but ranger's a bit weak in the early. But yeah, this is fairly balanced setup also. Then we've got young farmers looking for a better life. Starts with bread plus 10, happiness minus 2, starting companions, brute, spearman, spearman, archer. I'm not really a big fan of setup at all. Double spearman don't do a lot of damage at all. They're kind of just there, for utility mostly. So you'll be lacking damage, you'll be lacking tanks. You also have an early game archer, which means your early game... I feel like early game in Wartales is probably the hardest part of the game, and then it gets a bit easier around mid and late again. So you're literally going to have a really terrible early game if you pick this setup. Brute's okay because it's a tank, it's also quite strong. But yeah, double spearman and archer, that's not a good combo because you're not doing enough damage. But the spearmen are really, really good in the early game, but not when you have 2 of them, and archer this week in general. Then we've got bandits looking to escape the guard. Starts with braised chicken plus 2, cloth plus 6. This is completely irrelevant. You don't even need this at all. It's completely redundant. Starting companions, brute, ranger, ranger, archer. So this is actually a lot weaker than the young farmers looking for a better life, because this one at least has 2 spearmen and an archer and a brute. This one has 2 rangers. Rangers are weaker than spearmen early game, but they get stronger than spearmen late game. And having an archer once again is really bad in the early game, because archers don't do much damage until they pick up speed around the mid to late. Yeah, brutes are still pretty good though, so the brute is a good addition there. So I would say the top 3 here for me would be apprentice friends looking for an adventure, men escorting merchants who lost their employer, and deserters fleeing an abusive captain. Personally, I would actually pick this one. I like this one a lot. You get 3 tanks pretty much. You get a very, very high damage, damage dealer here with the warrior, or you can make it into a tank as well if you wanted to. You also get the spearman. At level 3, you get an ability that actually shuts down enemies completely when they move in range of your spear wall, which will completely stop their attack, which means you're taking 1 less attack each round, which is very strong in the early game, especially when you cannot afford to be attacked. So I would personally take this, but I can see people taking that and that. I think when I first started the game, I think I took this one. This one has barely any negatives at all, because suspicion goes down very, very fast. You'll get that down in about half an hour, I say, in the game. Swordsman, warrior, archer, ranger is actually okay because it scales fairly well into the mid game. You're just going to need to be a bit more careful in the early game compared to this one. So I'm going to pick this for the basis of this guide and click next. Okay, the next section. Your companions are used to long walks. Reduces the speed at which the troops fatigue. Stacks by 10%. This actually looks really weak, but it's probably one of the strongest things here you could pick. It's insane because you cannot get this kind of bonus from anything else pretty much in the game, apart from, I think, the knowledge bonuses you can get. So yeah, this is really, really strong. Our cunning fighters, experience gained in combat increased by 10%. Influence gained after battle increased by 10%. Influence is kind of like a redundant currency. You get so much influence anyway towards the mid to late game that doesn't really make much difference. Experience is kind of like, you're learning faster, you're leveling faster, but at the same time, that 10% will make a big difference, but it's not a race. You can just get there anyway. There's no point in having this extra experience boost unless you really want to out-level the content a tiny bit to make it a bit easier for yourself. But obviously, if you're playing on adaptive, that's not going to make much difference anyway because the content will scale with you in the first place. So yeah, having this is really not that great. Then we've got show incredible resilience. Constitution increased by 10%. Constitution is not that easy to get, so this is not a bad bonus. Are excellent at slap games. Critical damage increased by 10%. I'll put this at second best in my opinion. Critical damage isn't that easy to get, but having that extra bonus of critical damage is quite good because a lot of the classes actually scale critical damage very well. Could sell anything to anyone. Sale price of all items increased by 10%. So once again, this one's very similar to this one. It's not a race. You don't need to have that much gold. You're going to get tons and tons of gold. You'll have abundance of gold at some point anyway towards mid to late game. I think towards the end of my playthrough, I had around 10 to 11k gold. I spent a lot of it now just because I've been trying out new skills, trying out different specs, just kind of experimenting things. But yeah, you get so much gold. It's not a race, so you don't need this kind of thing. So personally, out of all the choices, I put this at second best. Critical damage increased by 10%. And I'll put this at number 1 because it's very strong. As I said, it's hard to get. I'll pick this for the basis of this guide. Okay, so before we move on, I'll quickly go back to the other screen, to the other scenarios. Everyone has a different last option, which is here. So let's have a quick look. So at the top, we have our quick learners. Experience gain for each profession increased by 10%. Once again, it's not a race. You'll get there eventually. There's no need for this. And also, the experience gained for professions has been nerfed recently, so it's not even as hard as it used to be back in the beta. Move on to the third option. So third option, they get know how to talk to new recruits. Recruitment cost of companions reduced by 10%. I barely even noticed the recruitment cost of companions ever in the game. Ever. I've never even thought like, oh my god, I'm not going to be able to afford this companion. And as you know, once you get to a certain point in the game, you'll probably have too many companions anyway, and you won't want to buy any more. So this is kind of redundant completely. Back to the previous screen once again, young farmers. So they get enjoys being one with nature. Increases the troops' happiness by 2 when they rest in the forest. I mean, it's not a bad bonus, but it's nowhere near as strong as having an extra 10% critical damage or reduces the speed at which the troops' fatigue stacks by 10%. This is nowhere near that. Let's go back again and have a look at the M1, which is bandits looking. So we have a gift for petty theft. Suspicion reduced by 15% during a theft. Thing about this is, once again, it doesn't really make a difference because thieving in the game, once you're thieving and stealing stuff, the suspicion doesn't really make much difference because it will go away over time. It's not something that's always there. It's not something that you always need to do. So you don't really need this. Once again, it's not a race. You'll get there eventually with suspicion and the bar coming down. So I've gone back to my previous option, which is men escorting merchants who lost their employer. And we're choosing our used to long walks. And we're going next again. If they had a flaw, it would be a somewhat meek appearance. Each companion's carrying capacity decreased by 1 weight. This is not going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things, mainly because you're most likely going to have a team of around, I say 4 to 8 people. So say for example, you have 8 people, you're going to have -8 weight. Once you have 2 or 3 ponies going, you're not going to notice this at all and be able to carry whatever you want as long as you're selling at the shop appropriately every time you go to town. Over to the second option, eternal dissatisfaction. Reduces the troops' happiness by 1 during each rest. This may not sound like much, but happiness kind of makes the world go round. I'm not trying to be metaphoric here or any sort of hidden meaning to that, but happiness in Wartales makes a big difference because if you're happy, you get more XP, your troops do better, they get damage bonuses, all that kind of thing. They forge relationships better with each other and get damage bonuses off that. Happiness scales very well. I'll say reducing happiness, which is kind of hard to get during the game unless you give your mercenaries loads of alcohol, which makes me very happy, then yes, I would not take this at all because it's very detrimental to the overall flow of the game. Let's have a look at this. An uncommon bout of bad luck. Critical hit reduced by 3%. So normally in games like this, I mean, this is predominantly a kind of fighting turn-based game. You're nerfing your damage pretty much with this, with everyone, your whole team. So say for example, you've got 8 people, 8 times 3, that's 24. You're losing 24% critical hit. That's how I think of it anyway. I mean, it's only one person, obviously. One person gets -3%. But if you have 8 people, that is a big amount of minus, critical hits. So for me, that's a big no. I've put this at the bottom of the list of never to take it ever. A very hard time getting up. Danger during rest increased by 10%. This is also really annoying. This is probably the second worst. Danger during resting. Sometimes you need to rest. You're just out the open. You need to rest up. If you don't rest up, you get massive negative effects to your team, which will make it a lot harder in battle. So sometimes you'll be resting, you get interrupted, and you're like on your last legs. that could really suck. So I wouldn't take this because danger is everywhere. A greediness far more developed than others. So wages paid to companions increased by 1. So once again, at the end of the game, I had around 11, 12k, 10k, I can't remember what it was now. But as I said, I've experimented a lot. I've respected a lot, which costs a lot of money. So I'm down to like 4, 5k now, even after respecing loads and trying out different teams, trying out different setups, trying out different skills. So even then, this doesn't make a massive difference. I think the wages per companion are around like 21, 23 gold. And it all kind of adds up and you have to pay at the end of the month or a couple of weeks, whatever it is. But yeah, this doesn't make a big difference. It's just 1 extra gold. So for me personally, I would either take this one, which is the 1 extra gold on each companion, or I would actually have a look and probably take each companion's carrying capacity decreased by 1. Personally, I'm going to take a greediness far more developed than others. So I only have to pay 1 extra gold to people. I get a bit more weight back, which means I can take back an extra item to pay for that greediness. Let's go next. Okay, so next up we got exploration mode. So we've got a choice between adaptive exploration or region locked exploration. So the difficulty of all regions adapts dynamically to your group's size and unit's power. The game will always offer a challenge suited to your group. Then we also have region locked exploration. Each region of the world has a set difficulty from the start. You will have to expand and improve your troop before you can explore more dangerous areas and fight more powerful enemies. Personally, I've always ever played on adaptive exploration. I find that the enemy scale with me, the group sizes scale with me, I find it the most challenging. And also I don't like the fact that if I stay too long in one area, I out-level the rest of the content, which makes it very boring for me because then I start the steamrolling and snowballing out of control, and then it has a kind of like a ripple effect on the other regions as well. So personally, that is just my personal preference. If you prefer to have enemies kind of like a bit lower than you, or certain regions a bit harder, something to aim for, or when you get like a bit stronger, be able to kind of like smash the lower enemies afterwards and kind of have fun with the game, then yes, go for it. You know, it's up to you how you want to play it. Right, so on to starting regions. So we've got 3 options. We've got Tiltrin County, we have Vertruse Province, and we have County of Arthas or Arthas. I don't know how you want to say it, but I don't really care. So in order of easiest to hardest, we'll go Tiltrin County. Tiltrin County has probably the easiest mobs and most likely the easiest quests as well from what I remember. The quests are very straightforward, very bog standard, quite easy to do. Vertruse Province, I would say, is kind of like medium. It's slightly harder than Tiltrin, not by much, but the quests are slightly harder because a bit more fiddly, a bit more explory. Then the hardest one I would say is County of Arthas or Arthas. And the reason being is because a lot of the mobs are quite tough here. And also some of the quests are quite tough as well. I would say for me personally, if I was playing the game from scratch once again, I'd probably pick County of Arthas because it was one of my favorite counties and also the most fun to play for me. I really like the quests. I really like the enemies as well inside of it. But for the basis of this guide, we're going to go Tiltrin County. So we've got combat difficulty, we've got novice, experienced, and we've got expert. So the game starts off very, very hard at the beginning. So the first, I say like 1 to 5 levels, 1 to 6 levels, very difficult. Once you get past that mark into the mid to late game, the game becomes a lot easier. So it depends how you want to pick your challenge. But personally, I'll go expert most of the time because I prefer to have the challenge at the highest level as it can be. But there's no harm in going novice. There's no harm in going experience. I would say experience if you want the best kind of experience, no pun intended. But you can change your options once you are inside the game. So right now, this doesn't actually make a difference. So you can actually go expert and be like, oh, actually, that's too goddamn hard. Then you just switch it down during the game and go back to experienced or novice, you know. On to survival difficulty. So survival difficulty mainly affects your resources. Say, for example, your wages, how much you fatigue, how much food you get, all that kind of thing, all the kind of survival experience in most other games. So, for example, like Valheim or Coat of Lambs, anything like that, any sort of game where you need resources to kind of feed your minions or, you know, keep your mercenaries alive, keep them fed, keep them, you know, happy and all that kind of thing. This is what affects it mainly. So if I was starting out again, I'd pick expert because I know where everything is. I know how to make money very quickly and I know how to get the food and all that kind of thing and cooking. But I would say if you're starting out and this is kind of your first kind of survival game, inverted commas, I'll go novice. If you are kind of used to survival games, I'll go experienced. I think experience is, I didn't really notice much of a difference when I was playing as experience. I thought like, oh, this seems like it's kind of like the base difficulty anyway. It's kind of basic. There's not really, it doesn't seem that hard. I didn't really struggle at all to find food or gold, at least from what I can remember, I didn't. but I personally pick expert these days because I know what I'm doing a bit more. Onto save mode. So you got limited, only one save per game, but you can go back at any time to certain checkpoints, like the last village you visited, at the beginning of the battle, etc. Then we got free, which is you can save at any time and make multiple saves of the same game. And we got Iron Man, one save, one chance. You cannot go back, and any game over is irreversible. This is the most difficult and demanding game mode in Wartales. I would say limited or free if you're just beginning the game, so you kind of get a feel for what you're doing first, and then you can kind of like restart and play Iron Man afterwards, possibly. Let's go Iron Man, go next. So we have our merry group of men and women. So as you can see, there's only 4 here. We've got the Brute, Warrior, Swordsman, and Spearman. I'm going to go back and do the Archer and Ranger after this to make sure we cover all the classes you can start with. We'll start with the Brute though. So Brute, doesn't really matter about the appearance or the name at all. Starting weapon, let's have a quick look. So depending who you want to be your tank at the start of the game is making a big difference to what your starting weapon is. Personally, on the Brute, I'd probably just pick a club and a shield to start with. Utility wise, I'll switch that over to this. Wrath is the best skill. If you guys have ever seen my guides, I always say this, but Wrath is the best skill on any melee character in the game because it will allow you to do a tiny bit more damage. That stops you taking more damage, and also if you get the killing blow on that target, you get 50% more damage on your next attack. There's nothing not to like about this skill. It's very, very powerful. Okay, traits. So I'm going to go through all the traits and kind of give a yay or a nay whether they're good or not. So we'll start with Bloodthirsty. Critical hit increased by 3%. Pretty damn good. I say top 3 at least. Critical hit is quite hard to get in the game, so having critical hit on your trait is pretty decent. And we've got Brawny, Constitution increased by 5%. Constitution is hard to get, but the thing about 5% on nothing is still nothing. So having no Constitution means you're not really scaling up much anyway. Then we got Strong, Strength increased by 5%. So for the Brute, Strength is your main stat. That's not to say it is the best stat to take all the time though. Most weapons in the game have a massive amount of strength or dex on them depending which class you are playing and which weapon you are using. But that means that if you have a massive amount of strength on the weapon, 5% increase on that massive amount of strength will be a fair chunk of change. Then we've got Nimble, Dexterity increased by 5%. So the Brute does not use Dexterity at all. This is more for the Archer or the Ranger. Over to Hardworking, earns 20% more profession experience. Once again, I sound like a broken record. The game is not a race. You'll get there eventually. Earns 5% more experience. Once again, we're going to mirror what I said above. Quick, movement increased by 1. Movement's actually fairly hard to get in the game, actually. I feel like movement's pretty decent as well on a lot of characters. So that is probably one of the top 3 to take as well. They've got wages reduced by 10%. Wages don't really make much of a difference at all in this game. I said you will be rich in no time. Then we've got thick skin, 3% base guard. Guard is actually nice to have. I feel like on a tanky character, this wouldn't be a bad choice. I'd say top 5 to take. Otherwise, I would say there's better choices. They've got stocky, carrying capacity increased by 3. Once you have 3 or 4 ponies, you're good to go. You will not need this at all. So personally, I would take Bloodthirsty, critical hit increased by 3%. Second trait, we're going with Strong, so that's 5% increase. So the reason why I didn't take the quick here, the movement increased by 1, compared to Bloodthirsty, if it's movement increased by 3 versus Bloodthirsty, critical hit increased by 3, that'd be a fair exchange completely. That'd be very, very fair. But in the game, critical hit and movement, you can raise them both by 1, pretty much, or by 2 if you get a double dip in a stat. I'm going to be putting out stat guides for all the classes very soon as well, so look out for that. So I'll go into a bit more detail about how to stat up your characters and why you need to stat them up in this way. Okay, so negative traits, we're going to say yay or nay to them once again. A glutton will eat +1 food each day. What an appetite. So gluttony isn't really a big deal in the game at all. Food is in abundance. It's very easy to come across food. Unless you have 2 or 3 bears, then you're kind of screwed anyway. And why would you have 2 or 3 bears in the first place? They are very powerful, but they eat so much. You would not want to do that to yourself, trust me. But yeah, having a glutton doesn't really make much difference. I think in my team at the moment, they eat around 29 food every time they need food or need to rest. That's not a lot. So we add another 6 onto that. That'd be around 35. My team is around 6 people. That's 35 food every time they need to rest, which isn't a big deal. I have so much food in my bags. I steal so much food. Food is in abundance. The glutton is a top pick for a negative trait. Then we've got pickpocket, 3+ increase in wages. 3+ for 6 people. That is around 18 gold increase pretty much. That's not too bad, but it still makes a tiny bit more of a dent than the last trait we took earlier. Then we got lazy. earns 20% less profession experience. The game is not a race, but also we don't want to penalize ourselves too much. 20% less profession experience is kind of annoying. Then we've got gains 5% less experience. That's not too bad. The profession experience is annoying. That's actually not too bad, the stupid one. Then we've got club-footed, movement reduced by 1. Movement's actually really good in games like this. Every single game with movement, say for example, you got Divinity, you got Baldur's Gate, anything like that, so where you can move fast to get someplace where you normally wouldn't be able to reach. You know, Sloster, those games, you need to have movement to be able to do certain things at certain plays. So movement's very good in any game, pretty much. You don't want to decrease that. Then we've got Depressed. Willpower reduced by 2. Willpower, since I first started playing, has actually become very powerful. They buffed it quite a lot. So willpower has become one of the best stats in the game now. Then we've got Drunkard. Must consume alcohol with every meal to be happy. But on top of that, the other thing is you will have to find alcohol every time before you rest. Otherwise, you'll have a very unhappy chappy. And unhappiness is really, really bad in this game. Once you go unhappy, everything will start spiraling and you'll start losing your team members, which would really, really suck. So out of all the negative traits, my top 2 picks would be Glutton and Pickpocket. We're going to go Glutton for the Brute and then go to the next character. So the next character is the Warrior. So starting weapon, we're going to go for a big, chunky 2-handed axe. Warrior does a lot of damage, so you need to have a weapon that does a lot of damage. Starting ability, once again, we're going to have Wrath here. Wrath's the best ability to take in most cases, or nearly all cases if you are a melee character. Then over to traits. Once again, we'll take Bloodthirsty for the critical hit increase by 3%. And our next one will be Strong because Berserker's main stat is Strength once again and not Dex. So we'll do that. Negative trait, we'll take another Glutton and close that. Then Swordsman. So Swordsman, same kind of style once again. We can either make him a tank or we can make him a 2-handed wielder, depending on what we want to do really. I'd say at the start of the game, having an extra sword and board person actually helps quite a lot with the injuries. So instead of taking injuries are things that give you negative effects and you have to kind of cure them with medicine, which can really suck. Some of them can be really, really bad, like decreasing all your hit points by half or taking away all your crit chance. Anything like that can be really annoying at the start of the game. So having the shield will stop them from getting onto your HP, which will also stop you from getting injured so much. So having the extra shield, I think, is probably the best way to go. Then utility-wise, once again, we'll take Wrath, because Wrath is very strong on melee characters. I keep saying it, and I will say it for the rest of the guide. So traits, once again, we're going Bloodthirsty, and we are going Strong. Once again, the Swordman is predominantly strength-based, so it doesn't need any dex at all, so strength is the main stat of the Swordman. Negative trait, we're going to take Glutton again, because we're not really that fussed about Gluttons at all. The food increase does not make a big difference to us, so we don't really care, so we're going to close that down. Now the Spearman. So on the Spearman, Shock Horror, I'm actually going to leave the first aid on here. Heals a dying ally for 10% of their max health, because someone needs to have this on the team at the beginning, at least one person. So the Spearman being the person that doesn't need the Wrath as much as the others, and being the person that's normally going to hump other people and be very close to them, we're going to put the first aid on him because he's more likely to be able to use it because he has long range-ish attacks with his spear because he has more range than most other characters. So later on, we will pick up the Wrath though at one of the Brotherhood places. So this isn't that needed on the Spearman at the beginning, but later on when he gets a bit more damage, because his damage isn't great at the start at all, but later on it will be, and then he can use Wrath then. So yeah, we'll keep the medicine, the first aid on here, just to make sure we can heal people up. So traits wise, once again, Bloodthirsty. I love that trait. And the other one, Spearman, is a strong character. Once again, it's his main stat. And this will scale all the time with your Spearman, all the other characters as well, because any weapons you get that have increase of strength will go up in strength as well using this. So it's very powerful. Negative trait, once again, we'll take Glutton. So Glutton once again, and we will close that down. Right, so I went back and picked a different setup that had an Archer and a Ranger in it. So let's start with the Archer first. So Archer, we're going to change the utility here. We'll change it over to first aid once again. If no one in the party has first aid, you need to take this. So say, for example, you're playing with everyone else, this kind of setup right now, most people will be having Wrath on them, but you take the first aid on the Archer at the beginning, and then later on, you'll probably pick up either Run or you'll pick up the Aim instead. If someone has first aid in your party already, you take Aim instead of that. Then we've got traits wise. So traits will take Bloodthirsty once again, gives us critical hit chance. And then we'll also take Nimble, dexterity increased by 5%. Nimble is the same as strength, or strong, shall I say. and it just increases the main stat of the archer, which is dexterity. Random negative trait will be either glutton or pickpocket. So we're going to take glutton once again and close that down. Over to ranger. Utility wise, we're going to change to wrath. Rangers are your hardest hitting people, like the rogues. They hit very, very hard, so they need to do a lot of damage and down the targets very quickly. So having wrath makes a big difference on them as well. If you have to though, taking first aid on a ranger isn't completely frowned upon. It's not ideal, but if no one else can take the first aid, put it on the ranger because they have a lot of mobility. They will stand next to the allies quite a lot and they won't be engaged in combat. Anyone that doesn't engage in combat too much that can use the first aid. So say for example, the ranger, the archer and the spearman are all great people to have first aid as a skill, but normally on the ranger you want to have wrath instead. Traits wise, once again, we'll take bloodthirsty, critical hit. Critical hit makes the world go round. And ranger is another dexterity class, which we'll be taking nimble on, which increases our dexterity by 5%. Then trait-wise, once again, we'll either take glutton or pickpocket, or we'll take glutton this time and close. Almost forgot the pony. So ponies traits. So this is a carrying pony, not a battle pony. So a battle pony will be using critical hit increased by 3% and most likely using strength as well, strong, because it's like their main stat is their strength. But if you're using a carrying pony, we'll go for stocky, carrying capacity increased by 3. And then over to here, we'll increase the brawny. Constitution increased by 5%. Constitution increases how much you can carry. So as a carrying pony that carries all your weight and stuff, you'll be going for these two traits here. Negative trait on the pony doesn't really make much difference at all. If it's not a battle pony, just take movement reduced by 1. Doesn't make a difference. You can take critical hit reduced by 3. You take willpower reduced by 2. Don't take the drunken one, actually. The drunken one would be quite annoying on the pony. But yeah, I would just say take critical hit reduced by 3% or something like that. Okay, so that was just a quick guide on showing you the best starting options for the start of the game at Wartales. I will be releasing a stat guide for each of the classes very soon, hopefully next week. So stay tuned for that. Like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next one. Take care.